Hi, as you know, I am Kaylin, and today we're going to be discussing the System Features window, and also then I'm going to show you how to configure a clock in the software. We're going to configure a CS time clock today. So we're going to start off with the Systems Features window. So this is in your configuration module. Now if you click on the bells and whistles, little gold bell, it'll open up your System Features window. We're going to just discuss these tabs here first. So you've got your classification tab, which is where you would then specify which classifications you would like to have available. These that are ticked here will then become available if you go to your employees, classifications. It'll be in this list then. Obviously those that aren't ticked will not be here. You can then set this up according to your company's specifications, with the details that you need there. If we then move on to the standard tab, you've got your daily overtime authorization, which is used if you're going to be authorizing overtime on a daily basis. So this then the employer would work 2 hours overtime in the day, and you would then go and authorize that each day, whether he was allowed to work that or not. You've got your payroll overtime authorization, which is the same as your daily, except for the fact that you now authorize this on a payroll level. So come the end of your pay week or fortnight, you would then, this employee would have 20 hours overtime. You would then go and authorize the overtime in your payroll window. You've got your expected payroll hours then that can be used. This is basically if you would like your the system to show you this employee is expected to work 40 hours and he's only worked 33 hours, you can go and enable that. What this will do is it'll show you, if we just go over to our user module, I've set up the expected hours on our employee here, so I'm going to show you. Basically, what the expected hours does is it checks your total hours column and compares that to what you have filled in for that expected hours. Now, expected hours only works on payroll hours. I'm going to just set this back to, let's see, I've got some June the 3rd until June the 9th. I've got my payroll here. I specify that this employee is expected to work 40 hours, but this employee has only worked a total of 36.2 hours. So the system is changing the total column to red to show me that he hasn't worked she hasn't worked the full amount of hours that was needed there. So I'm going to move over then. We're going to close the screen, move back to the configuration module. And then we've got the next one, which is our running totals. Now, running totals is basically used when the employee can work flexi time. What this will do is it'll take, let's say you've set up the normal time as a running total. It'll just keep adding this hours forever and ever and ever, and according to whatever rules you've set up. Like, for argument's sake, if you've said that it'll reset it, once. On every payroll period, it'll reset that to 0 again. Now, what you also need to know is something that I forgot a bit earlier on is your system features that are available depends on what level of software you've got registered, and then also then which modules you've got active. So if you don't have the job costing active, then you won't have the job costing features, for argument's sake. You will see then on some of the tabs it will show you what level or what module is required for you to have these system features available. Okay, so then we've got the next one, which is time categories are in decimal. You'll see then if I move over to my user module again, we go back to this employee's daily hours, you will see that the daily hours is in decimal at the moment now, 0.42, 0.88. If I go back and I change this, we untick this, I'm just going to show you, let's go back there, you will see now that the hours are in minutes. It now shows 25 minutes or 53 minutes, not in decimal anymore. So it depends on how you would like to view this screen. You can then either enable that feature or disable that thing. So I'm going to open up system features again. We're going to go back to the standard tab. I'm going to put this on decimal again. You can then also, the next one is allow default logins. So if you would like TNA to just automatically open up when you go in, you don't have to put in a username and password every time. You can then allow default logins where you can actually save your login details then. If this is obviously unticked, you can also specify if you want the operator to change their password every 30 days. If not, and you want them to go in automatically, you can just tick that. You've then got the use Windows authentication, which means that if you've logged in with Windows, with that username and password, you can log into TNA as well. You can specify whether you want that. You don't have to create, if you're using Windows authentication, you don't have to create a separate TNA login name and password then to get into TNA. You've then got your charge rates, which if you would like to make use of charge rates, you can then enable that. You can also put a currency, so you can, specify the different charges. You got, $10, $15, whatever that may be, and then you can use this to calculate your money values here. You can also round these decimal hours before calculating the money if you would like to do that then. If we move on to the Leave tab, you can specify whether the system needs to calculate public holidays or not, and then also whether you're using different public holidays in different states. So in other words, you've got a large company here, you've got some employees working in this state, another one in a other state, and each state has got their own public holidays. You can go and specify that you want to add different public holidays for different states then. The split payroll records that include leave, what that does is it enables the payroll hours to be shown in two lines. So what it'll do is it'll split then your normal hours, working hours, from your leave hours then in two separate lines. You've got your leave accruement. What this does is it enables leave calculation then. So you can go and set up your different scales for the employees according to the leave type and how they would earn that. Let's say, for argument's sake, you would the employee would earn 1.75 days per month. So you would set that scale up and you would use leave accruement then. If you tick the leave emails, what this does is it allows the leave to be managed via email, the leave forms and that. So you've got your employee that's applying for this leave, or you've added the leave and it needs to be approved by management. You can set up leave emails. You can also then, if you use this, you can include supervisor comments or the amount of leave that the employee has left and whether this email must have a password or not. Then you've got the last one, which is do not adjust leave balances. So if you don't want the system to automatically deduct the leave that you're adding from the amount that he's got left, you can untick this. So obviously if this is unticked, you would need to go and adjust that leave manually. Like this employee's got 5 days, he's taken 2 days, you'd have to do that manual adjustment to give him 3 days left then. If we move on to the leave colors, this is just a few default ones that you can go and change the color that it would be displayed in your leave calendar window. If we move on to the hardware tab, on the hardware tab you would specify then what type of hardware you're going to be using, whether it's then CS time clocks or hand punch clocks or text imports. Are we obviously going to be setting up a CS time clock, so I'm going to leave that ticked. You can also then specify whether you are going to use sirens or not. You can tick that in and that would then make that available. If we move on to the Human Resources tab, on this tab you would specify which HR information you would like to have available. As you can see on the right hand side, it requires the HR module. You can go and specify if you want the employee's pension details to be filled in, medical fitness, equipment, etc., etc. You can fill that in. You've then got your access control tab. On the access control tab you can specify whether you want to use time zones. The employees may clock between 6 and 8. They can clock on this clock. Anything after 8 they may not clock in or out. So you can go and set that up. You can also specify whether you want to use areas. In other words, the employee clocks into the factory and he would clock out into the yard, for argument's sake. You can set up those different areas. You can also then enable anti-passback if you would like. What this is if the employee clocks, he cannot clock twice in the same direction. In other words, he cannot clock in twice or he cannot clock out twice. You've then got your pathing, which you can use, which you basically set up a little path for this employee to clock. So you can say, let's say you've got multiple clocks, you've got a turnstile and you've got a factory clock. What you can do is specify that the employee needs to clock in at the turnstile clock, walk to factory clock in at the factory clock, and then he needs to clock out at the end of the day at the factory clock first before it allows him to clock out at the turnstile. What will happen now is if this employee did not clock out at the factory clock first, it will not allow him to clock out at the turnstile. So that is pathing. We're going to leave that off. You've then got access rights as well, which is the next one. So if you want to set up access rights for the employee, let's say once again you got multiple clocks and you want this employee to clock everywhere except for the admin clock. So you can set up an access right to say where he's allowed to clock and where he's not allowed to clock. Then you've got your door locks, which you can specify that if a certain employee or supervisor would clock, then it would actually lock that door. Obviously then for that door to be unlocked again, that supervisor would come in, clock first, and everybody else can clock after that. You've also got your visitors, which you can enable. So what this will do is if you would like to use visitors cards, then you would need to enable this feature. You've also got the allow open door overrides, which you can then set up if you would like to allow those overrides there. You've then got your employee direction arrow, shows TNA status, so that'll then show, the arrows will then show if the employee status is in or whether that is out. So I'm going to leave that off. Then we move on to the enterprise tab, which you can then also, obviously this one requires your enterprise level of software. You can pre-allocate employee numbers, so you don't need to go and put in each employee numbers. Now obviously this is, you would use this only if you don't already have your payroll system with your employee numbers, that are specific that you would enter. Obviously there you're going to manually put those in. Otherwise you can pre-allocate employee numbers for those employees. You've also got an employee blacklisting which you can use if you'd like to just mark them. And then also you've got use multiple sites, that if you've got multiple branches on different sites and you would like to specify each site, you can then enable that feature. If we move on to the costing classifications, you can enable these costing classifications. Now this is basically linked to your job costing. You'll see it requires the job costing module, and whichever classifications are enabled under the classification tab, those classifications will be available under your costing classification tab. So you can go and specify which ones you'd like to use. If we move on to the job features tab, you've got your quantities that you can use if you'd like to use that feature. You can also then set up customers for if you would like to link a specific job to a specific customer and enter that details in. You can also then set whether you want to reset the classifications at the start of each day. So you've got this employee which is in a certain branch or a certain department, for argument's sake, and you would like to reset this on a daily basis because he changes his departments. Each day he's in a different department, so you can then go and enable that feature to allow to do that. You can also then assign your costings to slots. This is done in your daily shift setup, where you would then set up certain time slots to be allocated to certain costing departments or companies or whatever you've then specified in your costing classifications. But that'll be done in your shift setup. You've also then got your assigned charge rates based on classifications. So what you can do is if you have set up your charge rates, for 10 Rand, 20 Rand, $40, $50, whatever that may be, you can then go and assign those charge rates according to a certain department. So let's say this employee is, in the manufacturing department, it would then apply a certain rate according to that classification. You can also then attach costing classifications to a clock. So you've got then 4 clocks or multiple clocks there, and you've got one specific clock which is just for manufacturing on certain jobs, etc., etc., you can then go and attach a costing classifications, department like manufacturing. You can go and assign that to that clock then. You can also use follow my leader job clockings, which what will happen is you've got your supervisor that clocks in, and he clocks in to the job first, and any employees that would clock after that would also be allocated to the same job until the next supervisor would come. The next supervisor would clock, and all employees after that will be allocated to the same job that he's been allocated to. You've then got your rostering tab, which is our third last one. You can enable rostering. Now, what rostering is you've got multiple shifts. And the employee changes shifts every day. He's on a different one. So let's say you've got employee that works 2 days on a 8 till 5 shift. Then he would work on the third day. He works on a 10 till 2 shift. You would then actually roster that employee according to his pattern that he would work. This obviously would enable that feature. You can also then, with that, you can enable to only see the same day as possibilities. So you'd only see the Monday shifts for argument's sake that you can roster, or you can specify to see all daily shifts. So like I said, if you've got multiple shifts that's employee work, and you've got multiple departments, but they've all got the same start and end times, you can then see all those daily shifts and go and allocate the appropriate shift for that day to that employee. You can also enable the feature for daily availability. What this will do is you can show the system whether the employee is only available on Mondays to Fridays, or whether he's only available on a Tuesday and a Thursday, for argument's sake. You can then fill in that information. You've then got double shifts and split shifts. Double shifts is a feature that's still in, busy being developed, but you've got your split shifts then that we're going to that I'll explain there, which basically what this does is the employee would come in the morning and he works his 8 till 12 shifts, for argument's sake. He leaves then and he comes back at 7 o'clock at night till 10 o'clock. So he would then work a split shift. So you can enable that feature then if needs be. If we move on to the web tab, this is where you would then enter all your or activate your web features that you would like for the web interface. You can, just like with your user module, you can specify whether the employee's web password needs to be changed every 30 days. You can also then, in the web interface, when you add manual daily hours, it is usually on pending, but you can change it that the daily hours are approved by default. So when you're going to add those daily hours, it'll automatically be set to approved. You can also then use the hierarchy system. You set this up then that you can say, this employee would supervise the following 10 employees, or this employee is supervised by so-and-so. So you can set up a hierarchy system according to who, if this supervisor logs in, he may only see, the 10 employees that is under him, and obviously manage the clockings and hours then according to what you've set up, the security rules for the web interface. If we move on to the last tab, which is the miscellaneous tab, if you do use any working time limits, this employee is only going to work a max of X amount of hours, you can activate that feature. What you can also do is your clockings in hours unrounded. If you've got any rounding set up, you've got 15 minutes rounding set on your shifts that's been configured. What will happen is in your daily hours window, the clockings that are displayed under the clockings here will then show as your rounded clocking. So let's say you had 15 minutes rounding, then this 7 o'clock clocking would be shown as 7 o'clock if you had a split of 7 and 8 on your rounding. If you've got that, if you have rounding enabled and you tick that there, then you will see the actual clocking in this window. Otherwise, like I said, you will see then the rounded clocking, which would then be 7 o'clock, or however your rules have been set up there. You've got lock dates, which you can also then activate here. What this does is you can put in a individual date or a global date to say that anything before this date may not be edited. So you can basically, like you would end off your payroll period and you cannot make any changes after that, you can specify a lock date to say any transactions and things that have happened before this date, I cannot, your operator cannot go and edit any of that information there. Then you've got the last one, which is individual employee payroll codes. This is basically used if you have got, let's say you've got 10 different employees and each one has got a different payroll code for their basic hours that you need to go and allocate to them. So you would then go and set up the individual payroll codes, give that description, and obviously then once you export those hours to payroll, it'll allocate then the specific payroll code for that employee. So we've gone through this feature, we've set up everything that we need in the system that we want. So I'm going to click on OK, and we're going to move over to adding a device now. So if we go to the device setup in our configuration module, you'll see that there's actually no clocks or anything set up here. So we need to go and add this clock then. So if we highlight the no controller, we click on add device. This is obviously my first clock that I'm adding here. And I'm going to give it my description. This is my admin clock. Now, according to whatever hardware you have enabled in the hardware tab under system features, it'll show all those available in this list. I'm going to set up a CS time clock, and this is a fingerprint CS time clock, so this is the 3000 series. So I'm going to select that make and model then for the 3000 series. If we move on to details, we're going to skip this section for now until this has synchronized with a clock for the first time. So we're going to move on to child clocks. There won't be any information here because it also needs to synchronize for the first time in order for it to pull in this details of the child clocks. Once this has been pulled in, then we can go and set the settings for the readers and go through that information. So we'll come back to that as well. The next one is obviously our connection details. Now my clock has been pre-configured with the IP address and everything that was needed there. So I'm going to put in this IP address, 68.2.247. The default port that gets used on the clocks is 5123, so you can leave that as is. You can then go and specify the clock username and password just to have that information in it. And you can also then test this connection to see whether you can actually then see that clock or not. If you need to use a push data facility on the clocks, you can fill that in. I'm not going to go through that because I've got a LAN connection and I'm going to connect that. If you move on to peers, if you have multiple clocks here and you need these clocks to replicate between each other, the information between each other, once you've actually added these clocks, you will see then it'll pick up the other clocks that are on the same network there, and you can specify whether it needs to replicate between these clocks or not. If you look at your advanced tab, you can also then go and limit a certain group to only be able to clock at that clock. So you've got your admin clock and you only want the admin staff to be able to clock there. I've obviously only got one clock, so I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to link a certain group to it. And once we fill in all the information, we can just click on OK, and we've added that clock then. So now we obviously need to go and open up our server module in order for it to synchronize for the first time and then get that information in. So I'm just going to open up the server module quickly, and it can synchronize, and then we can go through the other settings of the readers and just go through that quickly. Okay, so we've got our server module. Let me just move this over, and I'm going to show my communication so we can just see what's going on. Going to move that over as well. Now you'll see the PID is -1. As soon as there is a connection and the clock actually comes online, it'll change to a positive value. So we can see then it's running through a few little commands here. It's fetching the child clock, synchronizing all the employees that you've got on the software. Now you can also you can add the employees on the clock, and roll their finger and all that information, and then add the clock afterwards. And if they have clocked, then it'll collect those clockings, and pull them into the system. It is advisable that you rather add the users, with the employees with their names and surnames and, the card numbers and everything. Do that in the software first, and then open up your communication that it actually sends that information down to the clock. And then you can enroll the employees afterwards, which will link them to that, and their name is on the clock, everything like that. Okay, so once it says polling, let's just see, we're going to click on hide and hide again. Let's go and highlight that clock and say change. And let's go and see if we've got our information under child clock. So it's automatically pulled in the information from the clock. We can now go and edit that information. Now you'll see there's an add button here as well. Don't go and add the child clock information the first time when you're connecting this clock and all that stuff, because you don't know the serial numbers necessarily, and you need to have that match up. It's best to just leave that, let the clock do its synchronization for the first time, and it'll pull that information in that is needed. So if we go and change this information now, you can also go and change the description. I'm going to leave that as is, but you can go and change this again to your admin child clock or whatever you want to call that. Generally, you can leave this as the default description. Leave your serial number as is. If you are using any relays to trigger, sirens or anything like that, you could go and set the relay durations. The quiet clocks, what this does is the clock won't make any sounds then, when you're pressing buttons or when you're clocking. I'm going to switch this off again so that you guys can just hear a little bit later. So you can also specify then what type, what clock type you have. Is this clock only used for payroll? Is it an access clock, or is it a job cost clock? Is it purely for information? We're obviously going to leave this for payroll because I only have one clock. I'm going to use this for the employees clocking in and out, and I wanted to calculate the hours based on the clockings that come from this clock. Okay, if you had a siren that was connected, you can go and set up a siren set, and you can obviously attach it to this clock. And as I said before, you can then link it to whichever relay that siren has been connected to. You can go and tick that then, which will then enable the siren there. If we just go through our readers here, you've got your reader 1, 2, and 3. Now your reader 1 is by default always your keypad. Reader 2 is by default always your proximity reader, and 3 is a external reader. So if we just go through these settings just so that you can know, you can put this a description again. The reader type, you can set whether it's the keypad or the proximity reader or the key prox, or whether this reader needs to be disabled completely. You can also then specify the TNA direction. So let's say you've got 2 clocks and this clock is only a in clock. So all the employees that are clocking in here will only clock in countless times there. If they had to clock 5 times after each other, it'll only clock in. Or else then if you've obviously got it on toggle, which I'm going to leave that on, then it'll clock in. The next time it'll clock the employee out, in, out, in, out. The same thing with your access effect, except for this is obviously if your clock has been set as a access clock, you can specify whether this, the access effect is in, or whether it's going out, or whether it must toggle, or whether it's linked then to your TNA direction. You can then set that up. You can also then specify if there is any area restrictions, whether you're going to be using pathing or whether you're going to be using anti-passback. Obviously, if you've only got your 1 clock, then you would generally not enable pathing or anti-passback with that. But you can also do payroll restriction where you can specify, this employee needs to be in first or he needs to be out. You can set that up as well. You've got your in and your out areas, which you can specify that, if this employee would clock in, he would go into the factory, you could set it up, or if he would come out, he would go to the yard, for argument's sake. If you've got one just on the outside, only if you use access control. And then you've got your relays as well. Let's say you are triggering, a door or a maglock or something, and you need this to then trigger a certain relay. You can go and specify then and tick which relay it needs to trigger then when this when somebody clocks on this reader. We've obviously got a fingerprint reader, as I said before. We've got our onboard reader or then an external reader there. So we're going to set our onboard one. You can specify what the reader type is again, whether it must be disabled or if it's identify and verify, or whether it's verify only. You can also then specify TNA direction, the same as before, access effect. All these are exactly the same in areas, and then also specify your relay then as well. So I'm going to leave it on identify and verify, and we click on OK. So I'm happy with those settings that are there. And then also under details, I said we were going to come back here. And you need to, when you have got this clock connected to the software, to TNA, then you would preferably switch the processing of hours off. This clock has the capability of processing the hours on the clock itself because it has the web interface, but like I said, if you're going to connect it to the software, then you would want to switch this off so that any excess work overload on that clock and taking up space, etc., etc. Then the keep history days. Generally, I would recommend you set this to at least 2 parallel periods back. What this does is you set for how many days the clock needs to keep the information on the clock before it wipes that there. So I'm going to say, for argument's sake, I'm going to leave it on 90 days, which will keep then 3 months data on the clock. If anything is to happen, I can recover up to 3 months data on that. Once I've clicked on OK, our clock has been set up. So we can obviously then go and enroll the fingerprints on those clocks and have the employee's clock, and it'll then collect that information. So I'm going to change this over then to today's date. So let's go to the 1st, and let's just specify, say, till there. Let's just check here. Oops, sorry, I don't want daily hours, so let's close this window. I'm going to go to clockings, and let's see, we don't have any clockings for this employee on the 1st of August. I'm going to open up our server module again so you can just see the information. There you go. And let's see if I can clock on this clock. Let's see, there you go, it's clocked me out. Let's just see if it's going to collect those clockings. Collected 1 clocking. Let's hide this, hide that again, and let us go and see those clockings. And we have a clocking. So our clock has been set up in TNA, and we've enabled all the features that we would like to use in the system, and all is well. I hope you have learned something today, and that I will see you next time. Goodbye.